Hi, everyone. This is the WilmingtonBiz Talk weekly show where we check in with area business and health and governmental happenings. Today, we are going to touch base about the year's legislative session, which just recently wrapped up. Joining us today are Representative Ted Davis and Senator Michael Lee from our local delegation. Representative Miller was going to join, but unfortunately had a scheduling change and couldn't. And also Representative Butler was also hoping to come on, but she couldn't make it for a schedule either. But we have Representative Davis and Senator Lee to give us kind of highlights on not just the state budget, but local items of interest in that funding, other local bills, and their perspective on the redistricting session that happened this year as well. So Senator Lee and Representative Davis, if you want to turn on your cameras, there you go. Senator Lee, we'll start with you, and just kind of real quickly to set the stage here, give us what your highlights were of the session, particularly, as we're looking through the lens of bills and spending that impact the region.
I mean, I think there are a lot of them, everything from, tax reductions, increasing the zero tax bracket to $25,500, reducing the personal income tax from 5.25% to just under 5% and getting down to under 4% by 2027. Increasing funding for education dramatically, $1 billion in the first year, $1.5 billion in the second year. There's a lot kind of rolled into the budget, both on a statewide level, from a tax policy perspective and a spending perspective, in addition to just some local bills that we were able to accomplish, and some statewide bills that have a lot of significance to our local area, whether it's the Water Safety Act of 2021, or it's the Quick Response Team and DEQ for emerging compounds, or funding for UNCW. So there's just a lot packed into the session and in the budget.
Representative Davis, what was your biggest takeaways from the session?
Well, I'm just glad we were able to get a budget passed. As you know, I had worked very hard to get a lot of appropriations for New Hanover County in the last budget that was vetoed, and that did not come to fruition. So I had to start all over again, which I did this time, and thank goodness they did come to fruition and actually got some additional monies. So I'm just glad that the governor saw fit to sign the budget so we can move forward next year. Because I tell you, the things that we have done, by we, I mean the Republican controlled majority, in not only the House, but the Senate, but what we've done in the legislature in the last few years to just change the whole climate across the state as far as business coming here, new businesses growing. We are just in excellent shape. We've done just fantastic, and we'll keep doing so with this budget.
And one question I wanted to ask was about the upcoming calendar. So you mentioned it was a long year, and it was a year in which the budget did get adopted, unlike the previous sessions. You all started the year in January and just recently officially adjourned in the beginning of December here. So I think according to AP, they were saying it was the second longest uninterrupted session since at least 1965. So it seemed like it was quite a marathon this year. One thing, the calendar looks like there is a date to adjourn again on December 30th. Is that just procedural, or is it possible you'll still take up other measures then? Or would you address the redistricting issue then as well?
Well, from the House side, we're still not over. I mean, we technically are still in the long session. We will go back possibly at the end of December. If not, we would definitely be going back at the beginning of January to finish any business that might need to address. There's some issues out there that we may or may not do concerning potential veto over. We may do that, we may not. We've also got some other legislation that we might be looking at to complete for the long session that we've been doing. So that's basically it from the House side.
Yeah, very similar on the Senate side. We have some outstanding nominations as well that are pending that we may take up, in addition to some of those measures that Representative Davis brought up. But more than likely, the 30th might be more what we call a skeletal session, more procedural, and then coming back for more substantive type wrap-up items in early January.
One measure, Senator Lee, was something you had worked on and been a primary sponsor of, that didn't get resolved this session, and from what I understand, might be coming back up again in January, was the North Carolina Compassionate Care Act, which is an issue you had talked about in terms of legalizing medical marijuana in the state. Can you fill us in a little bit about how that discussion went this session on that?
Yeah, I mean, we introduced our bill and it's changed somewhat as we've gone through the session. We've had multiple committee hearings in both judiciary, finance, healthcare. We've worked with the Attorney General. We've worked with the Secretary of DHHS, really trying to make it the best bill we possibly can before we move it out of the Senate, and hopefully move it out of the Senate in the not too distant future. It's taken a lot of work. I mean, I'll be honest with you, when you look around the country, you don't see the best legislation when it comes to medical marijuana. So we've really had to kind of take the best of what other states had, work with our local, DHHS and as well as the Attorney General, and really try and make it the best it can be, and maybe ultimately be a model for the rest of the country to gravitate towards.
And also, on another health medical related issue, so Medicaid expansion also did not get included in the budget this time around, and that's been a long discussed, long debated issue in North Carolina. Can you fill us in a little bit about what that discussion had been like this session?
Well, I think that when we were working through the budget process, we were working with the governor. And I think the Senate, in order to have a compromise position, there are a number of us that were willing to, move forward with a portion of Medicaid expansion. That did not make it through into the negotiations. But what we are doing now is we're having essentially a joint legislative commission that's really going to work on healthcare access and potential Medicaid expansion that we'll get start with work on in January, and then start moving through and seeing what transpires as we get into the short session next year.
Yeah, as you may recall, one of the big problems with the budget 2 years ago was the fact that Governor demanded that Medicaid expansion, the way he wants it to be done, be part of that budget or he wouldn't sign it. Well, we didn't agree to it, and he didn't sign it. I mean, I don't mind looking at the Medicaid expansion, but I'm not going to have a demand that it be done in order for a budget to be passed. I think that was totally wrong. But as far as this time, I can tell you, excuse me, the House at this point, the majority does not have an appetite to increase Medicaid expansion the way the governor wants to. I know that we introduced a bill in the House previously that would have provided for some expansion, but it required a work requirement. If you're physically able to work, you had to get a job. Democrats didn't like that. Had a provision in there about that the person receiving would actually have to have some skin in the game and give a very small percentage of their salary. Democrats didn't like that. So we did not move forward with it any further than that, unfortunately. So while once again, the House I know is willing to look at the possibility of doing that, it's not going to be agreeable the way the governor wants to do it at this point.
So drilling down into the budget, and when we're looking at it, nearly $26 billion budget, what were some of the areas, items that were either specific to local spending, such as for the ports, that you could kind of talk about, or just they were statewide funding changes, such as the pay raises for teachers that will still probably be felt here locally, that you guys could talk about?
Well, from my side, I was very happy that all the appropriation requests that I asked for were obtained in the budget. I was very excited about that. As you know, I helped initiate the funding for the Wilmington Opioid Pilot Project, which is very important, treating opioid overdose. And because the previous budget was vetoed by the governor, they did not get that funding. But I was able not only to get funding to recoup what we did not this last time, but also to get the additional money that was needed to continue that program for the next 2 fiscal years. On a statewide basis, state search and rescue, which includes our Wilmington Fire Department, I had worked previously to get funding there, and they had never had recurring funding before. And in this budget, we've got $200 million, I'm sorry, $1 million recurring funding for both fiscal years of this budget. CTEC, which I'm very passionate about CTEC, which is our vocational high school. Once again, funding was acquired last time, but because of the vetoed budget, they did not get that money for their expansion. I was able to get them $4 million to help do that. That's in this budget. Food banks, they asked me to try to get them $500,000 to help to build their new facility. I was able to give them $750,000 towards that, so I was very happy about that. Got their new final $10,000 portion for the state Fort Fisher Historical Site to do their new visitor center. Aquarium got $10 million. And it's just really is a gratifying feeling when you're able to do what I want to do. And the reason why I ran for this office is to help people. And so I was very happy about that. But I'm sure as Michael can expand on statewide, this budget is a great budget. It really is a great budget. It's a great budget, not only for New Hanover County, but for the whole state. And I'm just so glad that we got her done.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to some local things that Ted and I've worked on, having the ed planning funds for Isaac Bear, so Isaac Bear and UNCW can kind of move forward with the new facility. I remember Ted and I meeting with them years ago to try and move that forward, and we were finally able to get it done. Career Academies for at-risk students, a partnership between Pender County, New Hanover County, and the community college system, really establishing career academies for 7th, 8th, and 9th graders in the summertime to go and look at different career options so they can, practical applications of math and science to what jobs may be available for them to kind of keep them interested, engaged, and involved in school. You mentioned there were significant bonuses that were in the education system. And a lot of times we talk solely about teachers, which are important, but a lot of times you don't hear a lot about the non-certified staff. Raise the minimum wage to $13 and then $15 next year. Really working on learning loss through the funding the NC Ed Corps, which is kind of a tutoring and outreach program. That's a statewide program. Funding the National College Advising Corps. And there's something new that was created in this budget called the NC High Tech Learning Accelerator. And it's really a dual pathway for students around the state that can engage and involve and enroll in this accelerator program so that when they graduate from high school, they can go directly into a high-tech job, whether it's Apple, Oracle, IBM, and really work on some of those high-tech jobs that really don't, it's really not college related. It's really just obtaining certifications. And a lot of jobs start anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000 a year as a high school graduate. It's not something any state has done around the country. It's new and it's a pretty exciting project. And like I said, we can go through this list and keep going for probably a lot longer than we have, but those are some of the things that come to mind off the top of my head.
Yeah, and in addition to what Michael alluded to about teachers and non-certified personnel, this budget also increases salaries for principals and vice principals. And I think that's very important too, because I know that was something that had been asked for.
Well, let me ask you one more area of spending, one more issue before we move on, and that's around water quality and addressing PFAS in the water. Wanted to know
a couple different levels. One,
ultimately.
I'm sorry. A couple of different programs. The Water Safety Act 2.0 or 2021 invests really on a technology to eliminate PFAS from the water supply. As you probably know, in the Water Safety Act, the first one, we explored new technologies, and that's how we came up with the granulated activated carbon that the Cape Fear Water and Sewer Authority are now kind of retrofitting their program to include. It doesn't pull out 100%, it doesn't even pull out 60%, from what I understand. But what this does is it funds a new technology that UNC has come up with that in the lab pulls out 100% of PFAS from water. They're going to be testing that at scale, utilizing these funds. then what they have the opportunity to do is to license this technology, because this is not just a Southeastern North Carolina problem, it's a worldwide problem. They can license this technology and recoup some of those funds that we can reinvest in other ways to protect the environment and also work on water quality. There was $30 million in the budget for the Water and Sewer Authority here locally to improve infrastructure across their service area. So the quick response team I referenced earlier at DEQ, which is an emerging compounds quick response team. So if they find it somewhere, they've got a dedicated team that can go straight there, as opposed to pulling folks from different departments to head out in that direction. So a lot of stuff in that regard.
Also, I would say that the budget does provide funding for 7 new positions and operating costs to address emerging compounds like PFAS. So as Michael was saying, this is a serious problem. It's something that we've been dealing with for some time and will continue to deal with. And I'm very glad to see the funding in the budget to help address that.
And finally, before we go, I want to touch on another major issue that characterized the session, and that was the very large effort to address the election maps for the congressional and legislative seats for the state. So that took a lot of work and dominated much of the time this session. That has now moved from the legislative arena over into the court system now that those have been improved. But because there are 2 lawsuits pending against it, the state Supreme Court last week ordered actually that the primaries, which would have been in March, be delayed until May, until those lawsuits can be addressed. And I believe the deadline for ruling on the maps comes at January 11th. So I know this has moved out of y'all's court into the court system, so there's probably not much that you can say along those lines. So I just wanted to ask, though, in terms of the discussion with the redrawing of the maps and your roles in that discussion and that debate, what were the things that you thought were most important that came out of that?
Well, I'm sure Michael will agree with me on this with both attorneys. In view of the fact that there are pending lawsuits about this, I'm really going to be very hesitant to make any comments whatsoever and let it just play out in the courts.
Yeah.
Okay, is there Lady?
Yeah, I mean,
Same, or do you want to comment on it?
I agree with Representative Davis in that regard. I mean, right now, filing, I think, is suspended. I think filing is suspended. I filed, I guess, in between the times that it was stopped. But it looks like the courts say that we'll hopefully know something, in January. At least that's what I'm hearing from what I read in the newspaper and on television.
Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on that and see how that progresses through. But I want to thank the both of you for spending some time with us today and updating us on the other local bills and the budgetary spending. For everyone who tuned in, thank you for joining us. And we'll have a copy of the video today in our afternoon email, as well as on our podcast. You can find it at WilmingtonBizTalk.com. Just a side note, also on our podcast, if you weren't able to attend our Power Breakfast this week with the year's most intriguing people of 2021, you can hear those talks and those interviews as well on our podcast channel, which you can find on your favorite streaming platform. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we hope everyone's having a happy holiday season. Bye.
Thank you.